Good morning, good afternoon, HubSpot Nation, LinkedIn friends. Happy Thursday, April 24th, 2025. We are here with another edition of Let's Build a Super Admin in HubSpot with Lucy Abal, continuing our conversation from last time where we started talking about renaming objects and how impactful that's going to be. So I'm excited to continue that with you today, Lucy. How are you doing?
Hi, Chris. Good. Excited to continue this conversation. And I hope this would be so enlightening to everyone that is listening and that will guide them better on what to do and what not to do.
Yes. So where do I guess I'll leave it up to you first, and then I've got lots of stories in just the past 3 weeks alone for how this is changing, like how you have to think about HubSpot. But where do you start when you start talking to people about this?
Well, the funny thing is that I have seen so many people messing up in just so little amount of time because whenever you give the possibility to do something to people, they just go for it full, like 100%.
Yeah.
So I have seen people changing names and then regretting it. And I have seen people doing a lot of messes in the CRM. So I think that now we have a little bit more information about what to do and what not to do. Of course, it depends on every business. Of course, it depends on the maturity of your CRM. If you have just started and you're doing your onboarding and you're just playing around, that's okay. That's fantastic. If you're doing this in a demo portal, that's okay. But when you are working on a productive portal, you have to think things a little bit more, right? So I think I would love to hear your story so far.
Well, that's where like there's a number of different angles that we end up considering that maybe we haven't thought of. Like we've got new customers coming into HubSpot and building data models without being attached to the way HubSpot has always done it. We've got HubSpot, you know, let's say ride or die, like inbounders, bleeding orange, like, no, I'm not even going to think about renaming these things because I'm used to it and whatever. And then you just have customers who are also have been in it, maybe didn't like it at first, but they've been in it for a long time. And how do they change if they've always wanted to? And how do they think about that? But from the perspective of being a HubSpotter and finding ways to qualify why it's named the way it is, like in HubSpot, I thought it would take me longer to want to rename or take more convincing to rename company to account, like, and deal to opportunity. And the first project where I was in, because I'm definitely renaming everything where I can from contacts to humans. Helps with a lot of conversations. But then I started renaming services to deliverables. And as I opened that door to just renaming in general, and as you look at the strategy for a client and you see the kinds of organizations they work with, you can immediately find examples of where company might not be the best name for something. I also don't want to go the direction of, let's say, schools, if I know not everybody's going to be a school,
But
right?
for example, let's just talk a little bit more about that because I found that scenario a lot, especially in SaaS industries, when the company that is or the domain, let's just say the domain of the person that is completing the form and that is contacting you, let's just say is, I don't know, Carolan LLC. So, but maybe you, Chris, are completing a form, but the account that is finally going to become customer maybe is not Carolan LLC or Carolan.com, is Profoundly. So we see a lot of those cases when you cannot change company because the company exists, and that is the first step. You complete a form and you create a contact on a company. But then the account is going to be, or the client is going to be a different name, a different company, a different entity. So we are building a lot of data models with the structure of, okay, you're going to have contact and company as the defaults that they work in HubSpot, but we're going to have accounts, we're going to have clients and registered entities, depending on the type of client, and then we're going to have all the other information. We're going to have revenue, we're going to have invoices. So building the whole data model. So sometimes we think about renaming, but that's not correct. Sometimes we are missing a step, or we are missing a figure, let's just say an entity or something in between, and changing the name is not enough or is not okay. So I think in those cases, we always come back to thinking properly the data model, because sometimes something was missing in the whole process, right?
Yeah, and that's where like I'm always coming at it from the perspective of, this is where like a consultant's perspective, definitely different from each individual use case.
Yeah.
And as we're trying to, like, one of the challenges right now is how to like rein it in, but create guardrails like we've always been able to, so that we don't end up with the sales forces that are just complete messes, because everybody can just do whatever they want all the time. And then it's very hard to support those people when they've taken pretty egregious action to create all these objects with all these names because they thought it was a good idea at the time.
Yeah.
So as I think about ways to standardize, like with the manufacturing data model, for example, like it didn't take me long to say like, well, because I'm also the person, let's get all the communication. Let's try to partner with everybody we can to build revenue that might create different revenue pipelines, right? So immediately it made sense to me to move to accounts as the name of instead of companies, because that was much more, it's a general umbrella word that, even as you were talking about it just now, like it's hard not to use that word in practice. And similarly, like deals versus opportunities, like deals has a very like salesy like connotation to it. Whereas sometimes we keep these partner opportunities on the side because we don't have a great place to manage the relationship and the conversation. But when we like open that up to be like anything, it could be an opportunity. It doesn't mean it has to be a sales process necessarily. And we can start utilizing deal pipelines or opportunity pipelines, in that way that actually supports. Again, all this is driven not by me wanting to standardize the data model on your behalf, but by your process and as it works for your business or not, right? So it didn't,
Yeah.
I was surprised at how quickly I moved, but then also how quickly it came up, and like, okay, I was in the middle of a project where we were trying to use the data model in a way like that was assuming we could not rename objects. And I like to play with pipelines as sub objects. And it took another person coming in and saying, hey, like, why don't we just rename these objects to help with the UI and not have to train and enable people so much to look in these very specific places to see what it actually is, because we're trying to do all this stuff in services and we could just rename it. And I was like, oh, I had to take a step back and say like, okay, let me just let go of my baby data model over here that I was so proud of, right? And just be like, no, that's right. From the user perspective, it's going to be much easier to see the specific word in
It
the
gives more clarity.
navigation,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
says like projects instead of services.
But in that case, you're just renaming. So let's just not forget that this new ability is called rename your object, not repurpose, because some people are just starting to, okay, so let's just now rename deals, but let's just use it as, I don't know, apples. No, wait, because it's still deals, it still works like deals. So just, I can agree on changing maybe to opportunities. I can agree on looking for synonyms that make more sense or using industry specific terminology, but not changing the sense, at least not for the standard objects.
Right.
The ones that are more open, like services, or okay, those are more generic. Appointments, okay, this could be more generic. This could be used for so many things with just a little tweaking on the properties, but not changing the idea or the purpose of that standard object. When you're creating custom objects, you can do whatever you want because that is the idea of a custom object, right? But what I see is that people starting to change not only the name, but the idea. So imagine that I change invoices or orders or subscriptions, and I just put, I don't know, monthly check-ins. This has nothing to do with it. Yes, it's still going to be something recurrent, but it's not the same purpose. So my fear is, okay, I agree on clarity for clients or for users. Fantastic. This is going to give more adoption. It's going to be more ease of use for everyone. Fantastic. I agree on the industry specific terminology, but don't agree on changing the purpose of the object.
Right. Yeah.
Unless, I don't know. No, unless nothing.
No.
Unless nothing.
No hedging here. Like 100% agree. Because even in that example, because it's even prevalent in the object library objects already, like you mentioned services. Because we also in the same account, there's been an upgrade to allow for custom objects now, which weren't in play. But let's say we move everything from services to custom objects, services being built into customer success workspace, right? And that's gonna be, looks like, one of the superpowers of that object. And whenever you hear people talk about the superpowers of these objects, this is the kind of stuff they're talking about. Like, even though I'm suggesting maybe a diverse approach to deals and opportunities, I'm still not suggesting we put things in opportunities that is not some kind of, focused relationship, building process that ends up in revenue.
Well, but
right?
for example, I have an example for you there.
Sure.
I agree on change to opportunity, and I do have clients that part of their sales process, let's just say, is building contracts. But contracts is an agreement. There's no money yet involved. Money is going to come later. But it's still something that is going to build potential revenue. It's a sales action. It's a sales responsibility. And those might be one pipeline, generating contracts. It's like generating partners, right? Or generating, I don't know, authors for a book publisher. So it's potential of revenue. Is it okay to use deal pipelines? For me, yes, even though they don't have amount. They could have an amount, or they could have an estimated revenue, but let's just say that they don't have amount. But there could be other deal pipelines or opportunity pipelines that are going to have the specific orders, the specific purchases, maybe coming from an e-commerce. So in that case, we could name opportunities, so we could change the name, even though we have different ways of working, some of them with amount, some of them without amount. So I do agree on that. And I can let people use a pipeline without amount, even though it's not the idea, even though it's not the more common thing that we see. But it is common for some industries, right? It is common for some companies.
Yeah. And that's where I think, like, we talk about the mapping and the processes, like, and we saw this update today, which I think is a window into where we're going, where like everything that could have a pipeline, like contacts, as an example, like life cycle stages, as soon as we started being able to edit that and customize that, all of a sudden it looks very similar to the pipelines that we see on deals and tickets. And I was hopeful that we would get to this point, because we do have different human-based relationships that need to follow different, like, how many of us just have a partner, like single life cycle stage, where it's like not the same life cycle that's going to get to that partner, but we got to label them differently. But in reality, it would be nice to have like a separate, and sometimes we create different objects just to be able to do that. So I do think that's kind of going to be the magic of this all, is like, as we achieve object parity, meaning this base functionality, let's say pipelines as an example, is available no matter what the object is, you just start to think a little bit harder about the journeys we're trying to create and that we would like to create. And this is where, if you've been in HubSpot for a while, you really have to take a step back to be able to see it in this way. Like, what would you do? What could you do if you had a second pipeline that you could apply to a contact record? As an example, instead of these various drop downs where it's like, business type or relationship status or lead status or all these different things that could signify where this person is in the journey that you want to take them on, versus some of this pipeline, like these pipeline like things, which you're also seeing in the new journey analytics, like the journey mapping tools, where we can start to define stages of the journey in a way that we haven't been able to before. And I think what we're always going to come back to is just map, understand the process, because inevitably changes to those core objects is much more than just renaming at the end of the day. It's going to impact something else if you don't take the time to understand how all this stuff, fits together.
Exactly. Yeah. And as you were talking, is that I don't know if many people know that objects now have pipelines. So in the past, we could only have pipelines for deals and for tickets. So now, and I think this is a common struggle, lifecycle stage and status for an object, and people tend to mix everything. And we started to see, since we were able to edit lifecycle stage, we started to see super complex and complicated and intricate and super confusing lifecycle stages. And it wasn't the bow tie model. It was like, I don't know, it's like an infinite loop of stages, and everything was coming back and forth. And it's no. Lifecycle stage is still meant, again, don't change the purpose of the thing because it was thought to work in a way that you're not respecting. Lifecycle stage is meant to build up and not coming back unless a specific thing happens. But that's the minority, let's just say. But it's meant to build up. It's not meant to, okay, you can go up and then there's a stage that we come back to trash. And then there's a stage that, okay, no, but now it could be a sales accepted lead. No. And if we're doing the same thing again with objects, we are missing the point. We're forgetting the process. We're forgetting the purpose of that object or of that lifecycle stage property. So we can have pipelines for custom objects. So we need to think really how this new object or how this information fits, again, in the data model and interacts with all the other ones. The other day I had a client that said, yes, because I want to bring from Monday tasks. I have things in Monday, but I want to bring them as tasks in HubSpot. Okay, I said, we can bring them as tasks. No, but I want it to be a custom object, he said. No, wait. Why? Yes, because I want to see them in a list, but you can't see them in a list in HubSpot today as tasks. Yeah, but I want to have them like separated in a different thing. But if you have them separated and not related to the context and the objects that you're using them for, what is the purpose of it? It's just a list of tasks. Oh, he said. So again, not just because we have the ability to create a custom object, everything should be a custom object, not because we have the ability to rename things, anything can be renamed. Some things are thought in a way to work related to the other objects and interacting to the other objects in a way that we should take advantage of it. Let's just not try. I have a car. I used to I used to hear this Italian chef on TV saying not just because my granny has wheels, she's a bike. He said, okay, not just because we can rename objects, we're going to change the purpose of it. If it's a car, even if I take the tires out, it's still a car. It's not a bicycle, it's not a trolley, it's still a car. So let's just not try to change the purpose of the things and take advantage of the objects the way at least HubSpot design it and program them to be. And when that doesn't fit the purpose, we can go to a custom object and change it. And this is super important, and I don't want people to miss this out, not to change the purpose of the object.
Right.
Yeah, the name, but not the purpose. So yeah, I think most of the cases that we have seen these days going wrong is because they're trying to do that. They're just trying to turn a bicycle into an elephant, and this won't fit in the same space, or this won't relate to the other objects the same way that you were expecting. Or it's going to take much more effort than just changing the name. The second thing that people forget is associations. They just think that because they are renaming it, oh yeah, now it's perfect. Now it relates, it makes total sense with invoices. No, just because we rename it, this doesn't magically create automations, or this doesn't magically create associations. You still need to do the work, or we still need to create the workflows or the automations in the back, or the programmable automations with Operations Hub. There's still a lot of things to do. So it's not a light thing to just rename objects. It's just the whole data model that gets impacted.
Yeah, that's why we're here, because there's definitely lots of gotchas that we're like, as we expand the data model, like we're seeing confusion around things like deals versus orders. And, the services object has an amount field on it. That doesn't mean it works with any of the like revenue reporting that exists in HubSpot. But that's almost certainly a question that you're going to have to answer, like when talking to your stakeholders in the organization you're trying to introduce this new object. And again, just taking a step back, and I think the team, I mean, it's an impossible balancing act, in my opinion, because they also have to do it in the face of how poorly it's been done in other places in the industry.
Yeah.
And what's been super interesting is how you have to, outside of HubSpot, like when you get to the world of truly customizability and do whatever we want in these other systems, and we talk about things like, well, let's name it over here because it's named like this over here. Sometimes it makes like just so a ton of common sense to do that. It just makes everything easier. I think opportunities in accounts, like when Salesforce involved, that's kind of a no-brainer. But as you ask for advice on data models outside of the HubSpot ecosystem, I am finding more and more that there's a comfort level with just the technical capabilities of people out there. And this is where we get into managed services and the way super admin, like a super admin in Salesforce, is much different from a super admin in HubSpot. There is a default to, well, let's just build it the way we want it to, right? Let's just create the custom object. Like, we'll figure it out later. And when you start going down that path, like you say, you lose out on a lot of the native functionality that has been hyper designed into the platform. And it's not that you can't, for lack of a better word, win these debates with, third-party providers that are not used to using HubSpot, not used to seeing it from this perspective. It's just a challenging conversation when almost everybody outside is used to just building it the way they need to build it, understanding there's a maintenance cost to that, and that we're just, especially when multiple systems are involved, there is an acceptance of like the need to make workarounds that has just been very eye-opening for me, to where I can stop people mid-conversation. It's not that they can't innovate into the native capabilities. They're just so used to being like, all right, we're not going to be able to fix this, so we're just going to build this workflow to do this, transform this data for no reason at all, other than we're just not going to take the time to figure out like what could be based on the things we have. So just caution to, I think the perspective from outside of the HubSpot ecosystem, it's very important for people to understand kind of the what and the why of that is, but just know that there's a great reason and why HubSpot is so successful and why it's growing in market share and all these. The usability is, the gap is much wider than most people think when it comes to the usability of the platform itself, and also the ability to administrate internally without a bunch of third-party support versus every other type of system in the SaaS space, right?
Yes, totally. And I was thinking about, just if I can go back 1 second to something that you said that I found it really interesting, and I think it's also important to mention, is that we now have the ability, of course, to rename the objects. When we are thinking about integrating to systems, as the example that you were saying, okay, renaming it in HubSpot, so the way it's called in Salesforce, okay, that could work. But when you have a big tech stack, you cannot rename it. You cannot. It's impossible to make it the same in all platforms. So we don't need to miss the point here on documentation and on communication for internal teams. And for example, I have another client that is, of course, a SaaS industry. They have Salesforce, they have HubSpot, but they have their own SaaS. So what should you name it? How should we name the object in HubSpot? Should we name it as in Salesforce, or should we name them as in their own software? Because right now we're just trying to match more their software to implement accounts, to implement trials, to implement users, to implement, of course, contact companies, not Salesforce. So we still need to have the clarity on how everything is going to be synced back. But we need to decide, and those decisions are really important. And it's not just to mimic other software, because that's not the idea. It's just to represent the reality, because neither Salesforce mimic most of companies' data models. It was just built that way. Objects have those names, and you couldn't do a lot of things. There's still a lot of clients in the old version of Salesforce, so you still get a lot of very fixed, old dated Salesforce users. That is not the Salesforce one and the most new versions, right? So if you weren't able to do that in Salesforce, we shouldn't go crazy in HubSpot, because you're not getting that either in Salesforce. But let's just forget Salesforce for a second. We're just trying to do the same thing for your business as, in this example, you're doing in your own product. You're doing in your own software. So that is an ability that I think we have gained so much by renaming or creating custom objects, to unify that structure of your product into HubSpot, so that it makes sense and so that it's easier for the teams to engage. But again, documentation and communication is the most important part. It doesn't matter if you're changing it to mimic internally or to mimic other software. It's never going to match 100% of your tech stack, because we're never going to be able, not all companies are making this available to rename things. So maybe you can do it in Salesforce, maybe you can do it in HubSpot, but maybe you're not going to be doing it, I don't know, in Dynamics. So that's not going to happen. Never. Dynamics for sure, I think never. But yeah, I think that with that in mind, documentation is always important. And I think all of us that we're always having these amazing conversations with you every day, we all agree on that. That is a very important part. Yeah. And another thing to mention is that we're super excited about these renaming objects, but let's just not forget that it's a beta feature. So we hope this is going to stay, but maybe not. So again, let's just not go crazy. I'm doing a lot of things that this may not keep. This may not stay. I think this is going to stay, because HubSpot is seeing everyone taking advantage of this in a good way. Most of users, I think everyone puts a good heart on using this and doing the renaming of objects, but okay, a lot of things can go wrong. We're saying it today. But again, we don't know if this is going to stay.
Yeah.
So let's
Luckily,
just
one
do
of
it with
the
caution.
luckily one of the cool things, and again, usually when HubSpot finally comes forth with these things that people have been asking for a long time,
Yeah.
it's very easy to change a name. It's also easy to change it back. And that's where, again, I think at the heart of this, like you mentioned, is don't let the software decide like what the objects need to look like, what the process needs to look like. And those are some of my favorite coaching conversations where you can just, you help people open their minds to like, no, you can do it the way that makes sense, right? For your business. You don't have to stick with this name or this association, or like there's lots of good reasons to customize and configure all of the stuff that we're talking about. And we're really thankful for how far HubSpot has come. But it puts more emphasis on the need to understand the processes and the strategy, because just because like somebody's going to ask, and I know like one of the rejoice moments is like, yes, now it's going to be easier to sell into Salesforce like accounts, because we can say, yeah, we got opportunities, we got accounts. Like whenever you say we've got that your thing does too, the chances that it's an exact match of how it works in HubSpot is like 0, right? So just because we can make it name the same thing, to your point, like doesn't mean it's going to behave the same way.
Yeah.
So really taking a minute to understand native capabilities of each system involved. I think not like another challenge is getting out of the mindset of like one system source of truth mindset, because that's where we start having to name everything the same just because the accounting system needs it to be named like this. Now we've got to put it in front of the customer facing team in a way that makes 0 sense, but our accounting system needs it that way, so we got to do that. So I think like the system mindset of we're building one system source of truth, got multiple different teams coming in, and they need it to look a certain way if we're expecting them to adopt it and use it successfully.
Yeah, and I really like what you said. Let's just not forget, maybe a lot of people doesn't know that HubSpot Standard Object, the way that they were built, they have a lot of superpowers. There's a lot of, not only the automations that you can build on workflows, there's a lot of native automations that are already inside that you don't see, or maybe you just turn on and off, that when we rename or when we create even a custom object, when we create a custom object without a strategy, it's just an empty box that is static. And data models are supposed to be dynamic, are supposed to interact with each other. Objects are supposed to be related. Things are supposed to happen, to be updated. So whenever you rename something without strategy, or whenever you create a new custom object without strategy and without the proper connection, or the proper relation inside the data model, you're just building a static empty box that I can see the future now and I can tell you how that's going to finish. Nobody's going to use that because you're not going to see real value. That is not going to really help you day to day. Imagine this example that I was telling you. You just have an object for tasks that are not related to anything. No, that is going to end up being a cemetery of tasks and forgotten object, and that nobody's going to use.
Yeah.
So,
and sometimes we spend thousands of dollars on that integration to be able to do that. And it's just like, you gave a great example. Like if the reason is, oh, I just want it to be separated from everything else. It's like, okay, there's tons of ways to do that, usually through filtered views and managed lists and things like this, where it's like, that's where like once the person understands that part of HubSpot, it's like, oh yeah, that does make sense. We should not create this separate object. I think that's a space actually, like project management. Like, I just think we haven't had time to like build out the use cases, but all the pieces are there. right? For the same reason, somebody can see an object and see a pipeline and see associations, see tags, see commenting, see all the things that you can do in these other systems. It's not a far jump to say like, okay, I want to try and do this in HubSpot, right? But that's where there's not a lot of underlying, out of the box features. There's no real superpowers. I think services in customer success is probably the closest we're getting to that as far as like proactive project management in HubSpot. That's why I'm excited for that workspace. But a lot of the functionality is there. And that's where like renaming objects in that part of the data model is just like half the battle, right? If there is no relationship to the rest of the database, like that's the prototypical situation where people just put data in and they have no idea what kind of value it's creating for anybody. And at the end of the day, it's just one leadership report that we had to create to make that leader happy. And let's avoid like doing stuff like that.
Another thing that but this is the reality of most companies. In 2 years, the person that started doing that and renamed everything is gone. And the new person that comes doesn't understand anything. Maybe he was using HubSpot in another company, but as you rename everything, now nothing makes sense. If there's no documentation, or even if there is documentation, maybe the person that is coming is like, okay, no, this wasn't done. I'm going to redo everything. So if we start redoing everything all the time, those are the portals that when we arrive and we say, okay, I can totally see that there was no super admin here working properly, no one thinking strategically, no idea or concept of data model here in place, or no documentation. So these are evidences that you cannot fool us, because we can see that in 2 seconds. But even though I can be fooled or not, it's not good for your company. This won't stay long. So we're just trying to build, let's just not overcomplicate things. Let's just try to keep it simple, organized, organic for your company, and to be something that will stay, to be something that really reflects the business. And that it doesn't matter if that person stays, so we change managers, marketing managers 3 times, everyone's going to still be using the CRM the same way. And I think this is important because you did say it. Companies invest a lot of money on doing these changes internally, time of the team, externally for consultants, for development, for integrations. A lot of money is invested to be thrown away in 2 years to be doing everything again because it was poorly done or poorly thought or not well planned at all. So I think, I think things need to be really, really considered in a way that are organic and aligned with businesses.
Yeah. And like if you want to look for a functional place to start, because even as I'm kind of modifying these projects that are already in motion, right, it's a shortcut for me. Because oftentimes when we're trying to educate the business on strategy and there's no process mapping, like it's just new, it can be hard to like stay in this really ambiguous space. So do we want to rename it or not? And I might create a big process document, but now like leadership says they just don't want to see it that way. But what you can get to is these user views, like whether it's a workspace, like customer success or sales or help desk, or it's the record views themselves. If you can just sit there and just ask the rep, what do you expect to see here? What do you need to see here to do your job? Now it gets so much easier to name things the way that they should be named in terms of like, common sense as it relates to the process, but also challenge that it might not need to change because what you're looking for right over here is actually right over here already. And now if we see that, do we still need to do this over here? Right. So those moments of, well, I just want to see it like this, right? If you're not looking at a view where it's like they can pinpoint exactly what they mean, like you're in a bad spot in terms of having productive conversations about this. Because it's real easy to say like, oh, I want to see it in the nav. let's just rename it. It's like, okay, what did we just do to the rest of HubSpot as we did that? Because that same person is like, you know what? I'm in this contact record every time now, and I can't ever find accounts because I'm looking for companies. And can we change it back? And like just getting out of that mode of we're starting to create this foundation of like, okay, what screens are you actually seeing? Because it's super easy to solve for the nav when you can just bookmark things in the browser and set up links for people, right?
Yeah.
Not for everyone, I know. And the team, I think, is taking great strides towards doing that, towards making that better. But ultimately, if you're not solving for the people using the system, like that, for me, that's the first place you start, right?
Yeah.
Because that's because like the next level thing is where the properties get created, right? Which objects are they on? And we start building this complex model. And that's where if you're not thinking about a record view when you're making decisions on properties that could sensibly exist in multiple places, like how can you make good decisions there, right? So that would be my tip for today is like really take a minute to think about those views that people are needing to see and like approach it from that perspective so you can get to the right process. I mean, create the right objects and data flow so they have what they need in front of them. Anything else on your list, for today, or any last thoughts before people just go and rename or go think they need to change it back because we just scolded them for doing it too quickly?
No, I was wanting to ask you, what are some examples? Did you get to see any other cool example of renaming things these days?
I mean, one renaming I'm doing is just formulation projects instead of services. All of my stuff relates to, I think the standard objects, at least deals, contacts, and companies. For me, it's hard to move off of the generalized version of those because it's just very easy to pigeonhole yourself and then be forced to rename another object to support the extra object that you now need, because instead of going up in terms of contacts to humans, because we want to manage human relationships with this specific object, if you go down to niche and say students, right? And then you're like, oh, this is a parent. What do we do with this? Do we create another object for that? Do I got to rename services and listings now? And then it just starts this domino effect, right? So that's where for those three, I'm trying to push everybody, like almost no matter what, across industries, across use cases, to go like humans, accounts, and opportunities. And then on the other side, like most of it's related to post sales, management, and maybe quote to cash stuff. And that's where, I've been pushing for a long time. I think deliverables itself, I'm going to switch services to that most of the time because that serves most of the needs post sales to handle all of these gaps that we've had in terms of, okay, you bought this thing, but we need to create a warranty for it. And it needs to go through a quality process that ends up with a certificate. And none of those things are tracked from a dollar amount perspective in any system we've ever had. It's part of the bane of like accountants' existence, like to see these $0 lines everywhere in the ERP because we've got to track them. We got to know that we sent it with the product. Creating space for that. So I see a lot of documentation, like you mentioned, contracts, a lot of those needs. I think those are the gaps that we start filling. So I think we see less superpower objects. I think they learn some valuable lessons in terms of the object library itself, and maybe not creating some specific objects. But that's what I'm seeing. on my side. And that's probably most of the time a manufacturing driven perspective. There's so many different ways to talk about inventory and assets. And so most of the conversation, like we said, is what is your process? Like, what does this need to be named for your process? But also, what does your customer need to see when we're building out the portal that you want and you know the customer wants? Like, just inventory item as it exists in NetSuite is not what we can call it for it to make sense to the customer, right?
Yeah. And I have one limitation that I wanted to mention. And when we work with we have a lot of clients that have multiple teams in different countries. So everyone uses the portal in different languages. So sometimes the translations of the names are not the most accurate. But what happened is that when you change the name of the object stays in that name, in that language for the moment. Maybe tomorrow. So what happened is that when you rename, for example, we renamed owners for the real estate company, but when I went to the portal in French, the owners were not propriétaires en français. It was owners in English. So they said, what happened? I don't have now contacts. I don't have now. Yes.
Okay.
So when you change the name stays in the language that you're writing it now. For the moment, this doesn't translate, even when you switch the language in HubSpot. So we have to be aware of that, because the experience for different teams in different countries in different languages is going to get worse. It's not going to get better. So we have to be aware of that too. For the moment, when we are able to put, now we can put the variation of single and plural. Maybe tomorrow we are going to be able to put, okay, but what is the variation in different languages? What is the translation in different languages? And that would be okay. But for the moment, just consider that if you have people working in different languages, they're going to stick to the language that you put in the name of the object. And that may add friction instead of doing it more appropriate for the teams. So that is something to mention.
That's a good call out for sure. I think that's another one of those things that probably they don't. I think there's a number of things, and it's starting to become hard on, like, are they actually like hard coding this stuff and building out an infrastructure, or is this AI handling it like in some way? And that's the kind of thing, like, if AI is just looking at that part, like, they probably could, I'll just say they'll be able to solve for it way faster than we've seen them solve for things like this in the past. Because that is the kind of thing, like, you can't just like Google Translate it, right? you weren't able to in the past. All these translation tools have gotten significantly better, obviously. But that's a good call out. Like, managing one language and one user experience is hard enough, but just be aware if you've got more languages you're dealing with, something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and again, I think that when you translate the CRM into different languages, sometimes the translation that HubSpot has chosen for that object, it might not be the happier one. So we have always challenged, for example, in Spanish, translations were horrible. Then when it changed a little bit, it evolved because we all created tickets and we all say, no, that is not a proper translation. Okay. But again, I can see that this is coded. This is no AI yet. So that's why we have to do it manually yet. And that's why right now, if we rename the object, it's going to stick to that new name in that language. So, but well, we'll see. I think part of this beta is for all of us, especially the admins and the agencies, that we're doing this at a scale volume with more clients, giving feedback. I think this is the most important part, because is the way that this is going to evolve? Is this the way that this is going to get better? And even saying, okay, we need to put a big red flag message saying, be aware that when you change this, this is not going to translate, this is not going to be adapted into the language of the user in the portal. So at least have this in mind before you proceed and you click save. Okay, yeah, we can always go back. Fantastic. But
we don't want to surprise our users at the end of the day, right?
yeah, they don't want them. We don't want them to freak out. At least surprise them, maybe, but not to freak out.
Yeah, surprise and delight, not surprise and horrify.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, this has been a fun conversation. I think it's a really important topic. It's one of those things that, and what I meant to say is, if you want to make it easier to give feedback about this beta, there's another beta to sign up for that allows you to see all the betas you're signed up for and be able to give feedback on each one. So recommend signing up for that. And it's been interesting to see them come out with that and how much they've updated just the product updates page. So if you haven't been over there, check it out, sign up for that beta. It gives you that new menu item for the betas that you're signed up for. It also gives you a new button on the product update cards that says give feedback after you sign up for the beta. So highly recommend there. That's one thing we can always count on from HubSpot team. Like they move on feedback more than any other company I've ever seen. And that's why they kind of roll this stuff out the way they do. They've got some incredible feedback loops that they've been created. And even this one, I get to talk with Maggie in about an hour and a half to unbox the new data model builder tool that they're working on. So nice. That's gonna be fun. Yeah, so get your feedback in there.
Yeah, and even people, if they're hearing us today or see the post later, they can comment, they can put up their case scenarios, what have worked for them, what didn't work, why it didn't work, or maybe if they don't even know, maybe we can help them just to tell them, hey, but maybe here you should have thought about this, maybe this was the proper name, this is why it might have not worked with you, because this object wasn't meant to work that way. So yeah, if you want to engage with us on this video, on this post, to help you navigate this renaming transition better, we're happy to do so.
Yes, please don't hesitate to reach out. Well, thank you for this continuing valuable conversation, Lucy.
Thank you. I think we'll keep learning new stuff week by week, having new examples for all the craziness that people will do, or that what we'll see on LinkedIn or on all the admin channels that we are. But yeah, I think we try to enlighten people on what to do, thinking about that, right? Consciousness about what you're going to do. I think that is the most important part.
Yeah, and I'll say for next time, we didn't talk about this beforehand, but when you're back in a couple weeks, I will have completed on May 2nd an unboxing of the new Tango AI CRM admin tool. And as we all know, it's hard to avoid the topic of AI all the time. And I'm sure you'll have some thoughts on what I learn as I unbox that tool and some of the hubbub that we're already hearing in relationship to how much admin work AI can really do or not do. So I look forward to chatting about that with you next time.
Yeah.
Right.
It might be the time that you're going to start chatting about me with AI also. We don't know.
No, not there yet.
Yeah, but I would love to hear about that. And maybe we can discuss, is this something AI should do, shouldn't do? Should an admin still be doing this? A person should be still monitoring this? Because I think there will be a lot of discussion. I love creativity. I love futuristic things, but I still see and I still know or can tell when something is going to go wrong. And that's why sometimes we say, okay, we need to take this slow. At this time, someone should review this before you can decide, okay, this should go straight to AI and no human review here. So yeah, we can discuss this.
Yes.
That's gonna be
It'll
fun too.
It'll be a fun conversation. So
Yeah.
until then, enjoy your week off next week, and
Thank you.
we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye, everyone.